So, without further ado, I am Lee Powers. I am our Chief Operating Officer. I get to be the lucky one to teach the majority of our classes to help provide education to all of our board members and homeowners, which is a huge passion of mine. Tonight, Natalie was mentioning earlier, we have different outside vendors that come in, such as attorneys, insurance agents, reserve studies. But we also do classes internally focused, like the one we're doing tonight. So Kathleen, our community operations manager, she supervises our entire CAM team and helps lead all of the properties that we manage to success. So she's a wealth of knowledge with a few years of industry experience. I won't say how many. And great resources to bring to the table. Natalie, everyone knows Natalie already.
The expo's coming up in October. I want to see you there. Bunch of mimosas. Just plugging it right now.
And bacon, we confirm.
And bacon. We have that too.
That's the only thing we confirm so far. Bacon and mimosas. And then tonight we have a few other people here. We have Brad. He is from our mortgage division. He's one of our loan officers. And then in the back corner, we have two of our CAMs, Jessica Posey and Nico Sanchez. And then we have several CAMs online as well that are going to be monitoring some of the chat and answering questions. So, full KFC here to help if you have any questions.
No worries.
As we go through the presentation tonight, if there's anything that's super important that you want to ask right then that makes sense, go ahead. But we are going to ask for Q&A at the end. So I don't want to get sidebarred too much with very specific property questions. So we'll try and keep it flowing that way. So I will turn it over. Me and Kathleen are going to kind of bounce back and forth here. So I'll turn it over to her first.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about your role as board members, and we're going to expand on the knowledge that you already have. So how long is everybody a board member? First time, we've been doing this a couple years. I find that everybody learns different things about how to be a board member from different people. And the goal tonight is to make sure we're all on the same page doing things together consistently. So tonight we're going to talk about understanding your role, your responsibilities, your governing documents, how you're going to collaborate together, not only as a group, but as your management team, your vendors, your legal counsel. We're going to talk about protecting your assets, transparency with your community, with your management team, and policies and continuing education.
So first thing to dive into are governing documents. So you're going to hear me say this a lot tonight. I'm generalizing a lot. Your community might be different in some of the situations that I present. So always refer to your own governing documents, ask your manager, because there is some nuances specifically. But generally speaking, we'll roll into governing documents first. So who knows the highest form of governing document, the most important one?
That's a trick one.
Good job. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is the master deed. So the master deed, there's a hierarchy of governing documents that is set nationally. So this pertains to every association, whether you're a condo, an HOA, a subdivision, no matter what. So federal law always trumps everything. And then state law after that. And then it goes down the line here with what's on the screen. So master deed or declaration, depending on what type of association you are, has the highest level of authority, and then it drops down into bylaws, articles of incorporation, and then rules and regulations, policies, resolutions, the type of stuff that boards can make and change. Those are the lowest level of enforcement or hierarchy. So it's really important to read them thoroughly, review things that you don't necessarily like, but are important to your community if you have consistent issues with certain things. Make sure you're reviewing those sections. If you have doubts about something, ask your manager, ask your legal counsel. There's a lot of times, especially in older documents, there's conflicting statements. We talk about this hierarchy of master deed is above bylaws, but there's a lot of bylaws out there that will contradict the master deed. So that potentially confuses board members, co-owners, of what to follow. So it's really important with those things that you're consulting with your managing agent, and your legal counsel if needed.
And one of the things that I see often, and I'm not sure if Lee does, but you might agree, is that sometimes these documents can have a lot of ambiguity and they're not always clear, and sometimes they have contradicting statements. So boards tend to want to create rules. You can't really do that. You have to amend your governing documents. And that's where a lot of this conflict comes in, is because boards do not follow this hierarchy of governing documents, and that causes problems in your community. So it's very important to understand what each of these documents do. And if they don't make sense and they're not clear, that's when you turn to your professionals for guidance.
And it's very important. You can make, Kathleen mentioned, you can make rules and regs, policies, resolutions, but you can't create any document or policy resolution that contradicts any of your recorded governing documents. You can create things that provide clarity or expand upon something that's in there, but it can't contradict whatever's in your governing documents. So we see that a lot with, like, say, an alteration request. Someone wants to put in a generator outside their house. Well, if your governing documents don't say anything restricting that, you can't make a policy saying, hey, we restrict that, because it's not in your governing documents.
Right. And another document that we talk about a lot, which is up on the screen and not on the slide, is the maintenance matrix. Everybody knows what a maintenance matrix is? So this is actually just a snapshot that your legal counsel usually puts together, and sometimes your management team, that shows who's responsible for maintenance, repair, replacement. A lot of associations use this as the complete guide on how to govern their association. This is not a legal document. This is just a synopsis of what's in there and someone's interpretation. So it's really important that, you know, this information is all verified against your governing documents, because these are always going to supersede your matrix. So it's important that when this is put together, an attorney does it. Because again, they're reading these documents and interpreting. I see it all the time where they're not right, or sometimes the board 10 years ago says, oh, well, we're going to take care of lights. And it's not the association's responsibility. So it's important to make sure this is in line with those.
Now would be a good time for you to review your maintenance matrix, or if you have one. Because I know many communities do not. Right, Kathleen?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. A lot of associations don't have one, or they don't have updated, or they're not correct. We see that all the time. And, you know, again, if these are distributed out to homeowners with wrong information, that puts the association in a bad position.
How would they get one specifically if they wanted to do it?
If you need a matrix, you should talk to your manager and have your legal team together.
And who, I'm going to give a trick question. Where do you find, if you're looking for who's responsible for something in your association, where do you look for that?
Good question.
Anyone? I'm sorry, Joe. So it's crucial because each of these documents have a specific role. So the master deed is going to outline definitions. So it's going to define what a unit is. Is it walls in, or is it an HOA where a unit includes property outside the unit? So it's going to outline kind of the definitions in the association, and then it's going to also assign responsibility for limited common and common elements. So those are what is outlined in the master deed, and then the bylaws is going to get into more of the rules and regs, the processes for things, what you can and can't do within the community, and then the rules and regulations, policies, resolutions, all of that gets into further detail of that. But those are the functions of those two documents.
And one of the things I always remind board members is that words matter. When you read these documents, you read them as written, not as how you think they were written. That's always really important, because sometimes we read things with feeling, and these are legal documents. You read them how they're written, black and white.
Well, and that's precisely, like Kathleen said earlier, a maintenance matrix. I've seen communities before where they they tackle that on their own. And they're like, hey, let's make our own maintenance matrix. The attorney's going to charge us $300 for it. We can do it ourselves. And then they interpret something like she said, and they're like, oh, well, this word actually means this. And then they make this responsibility matrix, and it potentially contradicts your governing documents. So it's very important to always, like she said, read it as it's written. If you have questions, talk to your local counsel about it, but don't try to interpret things. Always remember, you as board members are officers of a corporate entity. It's a business. Yes, it's your homes that you live in, but you're running a business. So you have to treat it with that respect and that authority.
And it's also important to update those. I've seen governing documents that go back to the 60s. Those possibly cannot be relevant now. We are in 2025. I know it's expensive and it can be a very cumbersome process, but it's important to update those documents.
Well, and that's where you do, if you update those governing documents, you get rid of all of that old stuff. They make the maintenance matrix for you. They do a lot of additions to the governing documents to make it easier to be in 2025, to have electronic voting, to be able to conduct hybrid meetings, things that weren't even around in the 60s. It's important to update your governing documents and get those in there.
Even just communication, how you communicate with your homeowners, electronic voting. COVID really changed the scope of how we operate in meetings, conducting meetings, and especially annual meetings. One of the things that people still continue to do is try to do annual meetings electronically. Most associations don't have the authority to do that. They kind of got into the habit. It's easier. Easier to do, but you really don't have the authority to do that. Which, when you don't have the authority to do something and you're not following your governing documents, you negate everything about what you've accomplished in that meeting. So it's important to keep that in mind. Follow the rules.
What is it? Because we've got some really old stuff that's just
You're talking
Yeah.
So what does it cost, and maybe this is not a private, what is the process for updating, and what does it cost, and who is the best, smartest person, the right person to say, oh no, we can cross this out, but this has to replace it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. Great question, and that's something that's a good question for everyone. We've done, I think Natalie mentioned earlier, we did a legal seminar previously, specifically around governing document revision, so that's on our website if you want to dive super deep into it. But generally speaking, it's around $6,000 to $8,000 to completely revise all of the governing documents for the association. So that's the master deed, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, any rules and regs, the maintenance matrix, that's everything, including the attorneys attending at least one informational meeting. It's including mailing out all the voting material to the community, and handling that whole revision process. So it typically goes where the board says, hey, we want to revise our governing documents. Typically the board puts together kind of a wish list or hot button items of things that they're aware of that are red flags. Then the attorney is going to review the governing documents and make a whole all-encompassing list of everything that they think should be changed, added, removed, and then meets with the board, goes over all those revisions, puts together a draft set of documents, meets again with the board to kind of review those, and then those are sent out to the community. An informational meeting is scheduled with the community where the attorney is there, where co-owners can ask questions, and have open dialogue about it, and then it goes to a vote. So it's not a quick and easy process. It takes, I've seen them take up to 4 months, I would say, is the max I've ever seen it. But it's definitely worthwhile.
How often do you do that? We had ours done in 2020. I mean, is it like every 5 years or 10 years?
So there,
changing constantly.
further. So the process I just talked about, I would do that if your governing documents are 10 to 15 years or older. I think yours are I've seen yours.
They count stuff.
Yeah. I've tried to read yours before looking for something, and I'm like,
We can try to
read what it says. So if they're 10 to 15 years, I would say complete overhaul. In the interim, you can do amendments to certain things to address laws that have changed, different nuanced things. But if you start to have a bunch of things that you want to change, then it's It's not wrong.
But how do you know the laws have changed on any particular subject? Like electric vehicles
Yeah.
or, or
Your-
bikes.
Your attorney.
And your excellent management company.
It's even
So you
funny,
send out,
even if your documents are not updated, the law is always going to supersede that. So it's important to know that too, because we don't want people running out every single year amending their governing documents when the law is going to constantly supersede that. So that's why we apply.
the EV one, you're running for that seminar, or even if your governing documents say you can't have solar panels, it doesn't matter. The law supersedes that. So,
Right.
so those type of things don't.
Well,
Yep.
hierarchy of documents.
Exactly.
It's above the deed. Yeah.
Jumping into the next topic here, I'll kick it back to Kathleen to start.
Okay, this is a tough one. And this isn't always a comfortable conversation that I have with boards, but it's about overstepping your authority, understanding your authority, working within your boundaries. Most of you here, all of you here, pay us in some way or another to be your professional management team. This is what we do for a living. You should rely on us for professional guidance and advice. This is what we do all day long. We do this for hundreds of associations, and collectively we've been doing this for many years. We always want to train our board members. We want to keep you educated, but you need to rely on us as your professional management team. It's important to also know that as board members, you don't act alone. You act as a collective group. Whether it's 3 of you, 7 of you, 9 of you, you're all a collective group. Not one person doesn't make the decision. You have a liaison that communicates for you, but everybody collectively makes a group or decisions. Document your decisions. I cannot tell you how often I see meeting minutes that do not document one single decision, but it will tell a story about what somebody was wearing at that meeting. Those are legal documents that can be pulled by anybody that is legal documents of your association. You want to put your decisions in those minutes. You don't want to put a narrative of what went on, storytelling. You don't want to do any of those things. You want to use motions, voting, resolutions. I think we have a slide of.
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah, it's in a few.
Is it okay?
We'll get to that.
And again, you want to avoid overreach. You don't want to overstep your authority. Sometimes board members, I get it. Sometimes you want to be the decision-making party. You want to be the person who runs everything. But all of you have a fiduciary responsibility to everybody. Every decision that you make needs to be in the best interest for every single homeowner in that community. Whether it's for or against, and not popular or very popular. You always have to look out for the best interest of everybody in the community, the financial management, the health, and the liability risk for everybody collectively. It's very important to do that. Sometimes board members tend to get a little overzealous, or some of us get
Passionate.
about their role and how they feel and how they believe that the association and what homeowners should do. And again, you represent everybody. I say this all the time. If you cannot sit on the board and make a decision that's in the best interest of everybody, whether that negatively or positively affects you, then being on the board is not for you. You shouldn't sit on the board. You have to be neutral, and you have to be able to look at the big picture. And again, you have a fiduciary responsibility. You do not want to overstep that authority.
And it's important, going back to what I said earlier, you as a board member or an officer of a corporate entity, you have to have that mindset all the time and think about, you see it most often when it's the budget season and you're talking about whether you're increasing dues or doing an asset assessment, and you're like, oh, I can't afford that, or communities on fixed income, we don't want to do that. You have to look out for the financial well-being of the entire community. And you have to have that same mindset with every decision you're making as a board member. So it's super important, not only Kathleen said to take advice from the management company, but to your legal counsel, your insurance agent, anyone that's giving professional advice that's licensed to provide advice to an association. It's super important that you guys actually take that advice and make the right decisions with it, because it potentially puts liability and poses risk to you individually if you go against that advice. So I've seen situations where an association got an opinion from an attorney on something. They didn't like that. The board didn't like that opinion. They didn't want to do that. Went to another attorney, got almost the identical opinion. I said, no, that attorney's wrong too. And then did the opposite. Every single one of those board members got sued personally against loss, because the association isn't going to cover you as a board member for decisions you make if you're going to seek legal advice or professional advice.
Yeah, and these decisions don't have to be big decisions. These can be something
This was
small.
something super tiny. It was about a violation.
Yeah, it could be something as a board member hiring a vendor without the, vote from other board members, or signing contracts and going and doing different things, or entering a homeowner's unit. Another one that I see that happens a lot is board members reaching out directly to homeowners in regards to violations or delinquent accounts. Do not do that at all. I know it sounds very innocent and it sounds like you're trying to bridge a gap. But that is not the legal way to do that at all. It can be seen as targeting. It can be seen so many different ways. You do not want to put yourself in that position. And you're stepping outside your authority. If you were sued by that individual homeowner, your D&O insurance is not going to cover you because you're not following regular business practices. You're stepping outside the authority of what your professional management team and legal team is telling you. You have a collection process, you have a violation process. Anything you veer off of that puts you at risk of liability. And Lee will tell you those board members don't get being sued because now they have to figure out how to fix this.
Yeah. Well, and it's important. Kathleen mentioned earlier is documentation, not only minutes, but like, for example, of collections. If someone owes the association money and you as a board member just go knock on their door and say, hey, pop up your money, you're delinquent, there's no record, there's no official documented record that the association contacted that individual. So when it eventually gets to the point where it's turned over to an attorney for collections, the attorney's going to say, I can't collect on this. There's no documentation that you told them, hey, you're delinquent. Hey, there's a fine. You have to have all of those records all the time. Any communication or any business that's conducted by the association is an official legal record that can be submitted. So keep that in mind, even with, I don't know if we have this in here, but like your communication personally with other board members, if you're texting board members, if you're Facebook messaging them, and it's in a board capacity, that's information that can be subpoenaed.
Yeah, and it's always important too when you do board communication. I would recommend setting up a board email. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people get in trouble, board members at work, because they use their work email and their work email will be subpoenaed. And that, again, can all be disclosed in a legal court of law. And we've seen some interesting things happen that way.
You say board email.
So when we communicate, and that's why when you communicate. So if a lot of people use their work email to send emails to their management company or their attorney, whatever it may be, if in the event there was a lawsuit or something and your emails were subpoenaed, they would have to subpoena your work email.
So essentially, you want to create an email used for a specific business.
Yeah.
So yours could be bill@parkingthewoods.com.
At gmail.com.
Something like that.
Yeah. A lot of board members do that. Is just create.
Or even, it's a good idea. I've seen several board members do it with just a generic, or it's like treasurer@parkingthewoods.
Yeah.
And then that email history is passed on as board members change. You still retain that same email, so you all have historical records of it.
Yeah. And, after we conduct annual meetings, one of the new things that we're starting, because I'm finding that board members do need to understand what our process is, just something simple as what meetings are, is we send out the day after the meeting, hey, welcome to the board. These are where your meetings are. This is how you get to the portal. These are the pending contracts. This is the contact information for the other board member. All these different information and tools, we send the board member toolkit to show you what everyone's role is, because it's important to know what the president does, what the treasurer, the secretary, the VP. It's important for everybody to know. The biggest myth is the president doesn't set everything. And that's not true. I mean, that's universal across the country. People always think board presidents have the most authority, and they really don't. They have no more authority than the director that has no title. So it's important to educate your boards when they are elected after these meetings.
Good transition into board meetings.
And it's seriously.
So board meetings, it's important to run them, whether it's a board meeting, an annual meeting, a special meeting, run it effectively. Have a prepared agenda. We'll have some samples in here, but make sure that you have an agenda prepared in advance. You're sticking to that agenda. You have someone that is chairing the meeting that is ensuring that agenda is followed. You don't deviate off it, have sidebar conversations, and go down a rabbit hole. Make sure you're following parliamentary procedure. It's a very strict process for parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rule of Order, but it's an important process. It's something that is rarely followed within board meetings or annual meetings, unfortunately, but it's something that is super important, and your management company can help guide you to make sure that you are following that process. Moderating discussions and enforcing decorum. So this goes back to the chair. It's typically the chair is typically the president. Sometimes the VP if the president is absent or someone else that they designate. But you have to have, as Kathleen said, there's not one position that has more authority than the other. You're all equal members on the board. But the chair is the person that is kind of responsible for running that meeting, keeping it on task, making sure there's not fist fights breaking out at the meeting, making sure that decorum is maintained, progress is being made, decisions are being made, and it's not just a bunch of conversation, people yelling at each other, and it gets out of hand. So that goes along with keeping focus. I can't stress enough how important that agenda is, and to stick to that agenda and make it a realistic. Don't have an agenda that's 92 pages and say, oh, we're going to make all these decisions in our 15-minute meeting tonight. That's not going to happen. Keep it realistic. Keep it specific and targeted, and make sure that you're meeting regularly to get all those items. If you do have a 90-page agenda, that's a major problem.
Yeah.
But make sure you're meeting regularly and having those discussions and making those decisions. And the key component after having that agenda and having that meeting is to document it. Have those meeting minutes. Kathleen's super passionate about meeting minutes, so I'll turn it over to her in a second for that. And make sure there's a lot of associations that are hesitant or nervous about having executive and open sessions. It's not necessarily a sense that you don't want homeowners to know, but you just know that, like at Angles, homeowners that come are generally they're just complaining about one thing that pertains to them, and it's not for the good of the group. So a lot of boards are hesitant to open up board meetings for that same reason, because they just don't want to deal with that every month, every quarter, however frequently you meet. But again, that goes back to the agenda and sticking to specific topics, having an executive session where you as a board are making decisions, having those difficult conversations, and then potentially open it up to an open session, give limited time to people, have that chairperson still moderate, ensure the quorum's maintained, ensure there's no throwing of objects at people, there's no nothing bad that happens at the meeting, but it's important because it gives that transparency and that trust with the community. You can send out newsletters, e-blasts, everything till you're blue in the face, but if people can't attend meetings and hear it directly, they don't necessarily feel that it's transparent and it's open. So we always encourage boards to have those open sessions, and it's a benefit to everyone.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate for that. I mean, and anybody who I've ever managed, I will tell you, I find so much more success when you open your meetings to homeowners than closing them. People always think there's like a mystery man behind the curtain that is hiding all these decisions and, evil laughing and like, today's going to be the day we're going to send everybody violations and make their day miserable. And you all know that's not what happened. You know, you're sitting there struggling with, do we do this added assessment? How do we pay for this group? You know, important decisions. So it's important they see what you as board members do and how the decisions are, you know, discussed and how determinations are made. So open your meetings up, even if you don't do it every month. You see, you know, some do them every other month, once a quarter. Open them up. If you have a lot of contention in your neighborhood, people are complaining, you see people gossiping at the mailbox, it's usually because they just want to know what's going on. They literally just want to know what's going on. And you have nothing to hide. I mean, everybody here knows we give them, anybody asks for anything that we legally have to give them, we give them. We don't hold off on any information. You should too. And everything you do in a meeting, they should have that information. I think it's very important. And like I said, you want to stay on task. Meetings don't have to be 2 hours long either. They can be very productive in 1 hour. I've seen very productive meetings in 30 minutes. They don't all have to be 2 hours. Your job and your goal is to go conduct business. It's not a social hour. It's, you know, there are times where you have to discuss projects and things like that, but it's to conduct business. And the minutes are to memorialize those decisions of the business you've conducted. If you're meeting every month, you should not be meeting 2 hours every month. Period. I really mean that. And if you're not, then we should sit down and talk about how we can make those meetings an hour. Because there's probably a little bit more socially going on than decision making. We just want to make sure everybody's time is efficient. So that's how burnout happens. When you're sitting every single month for 2-3 hours, you get burned out.
Well, and it leads to, like Kathleen mentioned, people have a perception that board members are just the Wizard of Oz sitting behind the curtain, being maniacal, making decisions to make everyone's lives miserable. You all know that's not what you're doing. You're just trying to get through to that. But having those open meetings, having that open discussion, inviting them in to see what the board actually does and what you're dealing with will help take the stress off you as a board member of getting worn out and tired of it. If you're meeting every month and you're just getting badgered by co-owners, other board members, you're having 3-hour meetings, not making progress, you're going to be like, why am I doing this? This is a volunteer position. Well, that's where it's important to have the structure, have the agenda, and all of that.
Yeah, and it's important to have boundaries as board members. I talk to a lot of board members who will tell me, oh, so-and-so showed up at my house, or they're texting me, or when you're at home, you are a homeowner. When you're at a board meeting, you are a board member. That's what you hire us as a professional management team, is to do your day-to-day management. I know it's not always easy because you might be friends with Sally and got a letter about her dog running loose. But if you constantly are trying to appease everybody while you're at home, you're not going to want to continue to do this. You can't be productive. You can't always be objective because you get disgruntled by that. So when you are being confronted by homeowners, you just politely tell them, contact the management. We'll talk about that board meeting. Our next board meeting is such and such. Please come and talk to us about it. So when you open those meetings up, it takes all that showing up at your house, texting you, emailing you, takes all that away.
Well, it's really a tool for you to say, when co-owners say, hey, we don't know anything that's going on in the community. Did you come to a board meeting? Did you come to an annual? Did you read the newsletter? Well, then I don't care.
Well, that's where we have the transparency of manifest. They can actually see a lot what's going on within their communities by going onto the portal. So you can always use that as a reference as well to say it's there. You know, what you need to see or meeting minutes to be able to access those too.
That's where it goes back to having meeting minutes.
Yeah, having good meeting minutes. But before we have meeting minutes, we have to have a good agenda. I see sometimes this is our standard agenda we put in the management report. We created this based on our professional experience collectively as a group of how an efficient meeting should be run. I sometimes will see agendas that are 7 pages long. That is so unrealistic. In 2 hours, you can possibly get through all of those things. You know, you want to put, sometimes I'll see, let's talk about the red roof down the block that has green bushes in front of it. And that's what the agenda item is. That's not an agenda. The agenda should just be very clear to the point. And then as you follow the agenda, your management team is going to have the management report that supports all of that. So make it clear, concise. It doesn't have to be a story. You know, I know we're in this day and age where it's like the more information, the better. But when we talk about agendas and meeting minutes, the more clear, concise, to the point information, the better.
Well, and we talked about earlier about things being subpoenaed potentially. If you're putting things in minutes about discussions, or Bob said this about Sally, that's an official record of the association. Then that's subpoenaed. That could potentially lead to defamation, libel. So just be clear, be concise, be short. Motion passed, motion failed. Just very simple things in meeting minutes.
And we have a great template that we give out to a lot of our associations that's really like meeting minutes for dummies. It's all pre-filled out. We give it, we match it to the agenda, and the secretary just has to fill in the most basic of information. And the reason we use that tool is so people who are taking minutes understand, oh, this is the only thing that needs to go in these minutes. There's not a section of blank page that says, write a story about how many people came up and what shoes they were wearing. Because we see that. And I mean, I've seen some really, really crazy things in minutes. And again, imagine sitting in court because you're being sued and there's minutes and you said something that maybe you didn't think was harsh or unkind or it can be taken in any way. And that judge reads it and they said, well, you were being whatever against this person because here are these minutes from 7 years ago that said this person showed up and she was talking too much. And, you know, you obviously were biased towards her, so you gave her this violation. It all comes full circle. And then next thing you know, she can have a purple fence because 10 board members ago said she had funny shoes. Right? And it happens. Yeah. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. I mean, it sounds like that might be an extreme thing. It's not. Yeah. We see this all the time.
Well, and it helps with the meeting flowing as well. If you're taking those concise minutes, if the secretary is only filling in the blanks on a form and saying like a name of a motion, passed or declined, and just filling in simple things, it keeps that meeting moving more efficiently. I've been to several meetings where they're like, oh wait, hold on, I have to write all this down or type all this out, and you shouldn't be documenting that much information. It should be a yes, no person.
The secretary stay engaged too, because they're too involved in the note taking. They're not actually absorbing and hearing to be able to give a thoughtful, well-crafted answer to whether or not this motion should be passed, because they're so busy writing it down, they're not actually thinking through the motion to be able to make that response.
Yeah, and board members, I mean, we sit here and it sounds like we're criticizing you. And Lee and I will tell you, he and I are on a board of professionals, managers, attorneys. And we laugh when we get the meeting minutes from them. And we're like, oh my God, this is what we do for a living and we still can't get it right. I actually volunteered to be the secretary because I'm like, how we have to lead by example. I mean, I've shot myself in the foot with it, but
congratulations.
Yeah. Now I have to, because I sit through and listen to a 2-hour meeting of everybody chit-chatting, talking, trying to find the 3 decisions that we make. So a 2-hour meeting is going to come down to a half a page of minutes. So that should be eye-opening when they get those, right? To see how much additional chatter we had that was unnecessary.
And these are the things we've talked about, all of them already, but these are the things that should be in meeting minutes. The date, time, location of the meeting. When it was called to order, who called it to order, who was present,
Who wasn't present?
who wasn't present, what motion was made, who made that motion, who seconded it, did the vote pass, did someone abstain from the vote, and then actions that, like next actions that are coming from that meeting based on those decisions.
And we have down here an example of a motion. So when you want to make a decision, usually somebody will say, I need a motion. Somebody will make a motion. We'll say someone had a second. Someone seconds that, and then we'll say discussion. And then we'll say all in favor, all opposed. And that's all that really should be written in there.
And that's really important where it ties back to what we were talking about earlier of parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Orders, because there's specific processes when someone makes a motion, when there's a motion on the table, what board members can and can't do at that point. So it's important to follow that process and to not just have it be a Wild West. Kathleen is from Illinois, and they're a very structured, regimented process for condo associations that is ridiculous. But it's structured that way for a reason because it keeps everything in line. And she always compares us to the Wild West here. So we're trying to find that happy medium and swing that direction without it being chaos or without it being a complete strict, ridiculous policy.
Well, we want to be prepared because it's inevitable. I mean, we see states changing their condo law all the time. And I told this story to everybody. Illinois was the same way Michigan was. And it took one homeowner to sue one board that changed the entire landscape for an entire state. And when I say we were exactly the same, you could do anything. We literally could do anything, just like you can do. And we went to, even if 3 board members out of 5 were taking a walk at night, it was considered a board meeting. So that is how much they cracked down because there was so much going on.
And there's things that are good with that, that we try and embody, and things that add a little more structure to it. Like if you have a group of board members getting together, you should be documenting that. You shouldn't be making decisions while you're walking to the pool. You shouldn't be making decisions out of a board meeting via email. You shouldn't be having those discussions and making those decisions unless it's an emergency. It should be confined to that board meeting on that agenda and decided upon within that meeting.
Yeah, we couldn't make decisions electronically at all. All meetings, unless they were emergency situations. And every board meeting was open to homeowners. It was required by law. And again, when I say it here, people look at me like I'm an alien, but I came from a very successful company, from very successful associations, and it works. And I'll tell you, I didn't use any of my association public. I had 3,500 units, and we met quarterly. So it is possible to run efficient meetings, make decisions in board meetings only, open them up to homeowners, and still be very productive.
So switching gears a little here to financials. So as a board member, every board member should have an understanding of the financials. Whether you're the treasurer, the president, secretary, director, you should have a basic understanding of what the financials are, what's contained within them, how to read them, and how to answer questions about them. Inevitably, you will be asked by homeowners at open board meetings, hopefully, of what is in the financials. What's the financial state of the community? Are we healthy? Is there going to be an increase next year in dues? If you don't look at the financials, you'll never be able to answer any of those questions.
Yeah, and we're coming into budget season. It's very important when boards are actively involved in the budget. Do the budgets together with your manager in a board meeting. You do it live together rather than the manager doing it, sending it back and forth in email. It doesn't always work. I would recommend doing it in every board meeting. Not every board meeting. When you do your budget, do it in a board meeting.
And some of the main things to look at, the financial packets, who looks at them monthly? Okay, that's exciting. I didn't expect that answer. So the main things that you should be looking at every month, the financials are 80-some pages. It has all the trial balances, all the general entries for everything. That's excessive. You don't need to look at all that. It has to be there for record of the association, but these are the things that you really need to look at and make sure that you understand. The balance sheet, what you have in operating, what you have in reserves, what assets you have, what liabilities you have, if the association has an outstanding loan, if you have a piece of equipment that you own, what that means to the financial health of the association. Looking at the income statement, the key thing on that is looking at what you're spending versus what you're budgeting. Are there huge variances? Is there something that explains that variance. Was there a random one-off project? Was there an emergency that caused it? Or is there always a variance? And is that something that you need to budget for in the future to increase or decrease? And the delinquency report, of course, that's crucial to the association. You need the money from owners to pay the bills. So if you have a high delinquency, you don't have that money to pay the association's dues, and you end up increasing dues to offset people that aren't paying. That's not fair. Again, tying back to what Kathleen said earlier, you're looking at what's good for everyone. So you have to look at the entire association. If there's one person that is delinquent for whatever reason, and you know they have some story going on of something happening in their personal life, it's hard. You have to be empathetic with that, but you also have to look at how that delinquency is impacting the financial health of everyone else in the community. We have one, I can't remember who it was that we were talking about recently, where there's 3 co-owners that owe $30,000 between them in dues, and the association is a small association, and they need that $30,000. So now they're increasing everyone's dues to offset that $30,000 in delinquency because the board doesn't want to send those homeowners to the attorney for collection. So you have to do what's right for everyone and not take special exception.
Yeah. Is there a rule of thumb that you have before you institute a lien against someone's property?
Yeah, I mean, my rule of thumb is we want to go through follow your collection process, and when I start recommending to board members when we turn over to legal, is $1,000 threshold. That is always my recommendation, unless your governing document states something different, or a different timeline or a different dollar amount. I would always say the board should start talking and having those conversations when it's $1,000. And then your attorney is going to send a demand, the 30-day demand. If they don't pay, then you're going to follow the recommendations of what your attorney advises.
Well, and it's important to look at what is specific to your association too. If you're a homeowners association, if anyone there's a homeowner association, but if you're like you pay dues once a year and they're $300, it's going to take you years to get to that threshold. So you're obviously don't want to do something different in that situation where it's maybe 1 year delinquent and they send it to the attorney for collections. But it's important to be conscious of, like Kathleen said, the attorney's going to send the manslaughter. They're going to place a lien. There's going to be costs associated with that. So you don't want those costs to outweigh the balance that the owner owes, because then that just seems punitive at that point. If they owe $200, you send them to the attorney, and the attorney charges them $500 for that process. That's a little ridiculous. So,
and we do have some associations that want to be that extreme. You know, they owe $325 and it's $275 to turn them over to legal. That is so justified to me. So you have to look at the big picture and the fiscally responsible to do that.
and it is outlined in your, probably not your government documents, but in most governing documents, it has a process of there's a late fee after 30 days, and then it steps up usually 2 more times, and then it typically says turnovers and collections at that point. So it's typically around the 3-month cycle.
We're gonna dive deeper.
That's surprising.
Yeah, we do have a little bit more to talk about collections in the next couple of slides, so we can hit further in depth. There are a lot of important things that we should talk about with collections. Well, we have 2 seminars coming up too, a budget seminar and a reserve study seminar. Those are going to be our next 2. So if you want to really a deep dive into it, we're going to have professionals come in and teach both of those things in depth too.
Some other things with financials, make sure you are asking questions. Natalie mentioned earlier, Vanica and the portal, you can dive into those financials directly and click on every single transaction and see a detail of what composes a GL line item. So if there's $500 spent on signage, you can click on that and see exactly what that is. But if you have questions, ask those questions. There's a spot in the portal where you can submit a question, ask your manager at the next board meeting, but make sure you understand what those financials are.
Yeah, we talk about transparency a lot. We're encouraging you and telling you to be transparent. Well, we are transparent as well. That's why we have all those tools for you on our portal, because we're transparent with the financials that we do and everything we house for your association.
It's important to monitor reserves and cash flow. I won't get on my soapbox about reserves and reserve funding, but it's important to be conscious of your reserves. If you're giving into your reserves constantly, if you're not doing reserve transfers because you have extra expenses, it's time to have that serious conversation as a board to say, hey, we need to increase dues. We need to do an added assessment. This isn't working. And have those real conversations.
And when you earmark money, that's what you should be spending it for. So if you have that added assessment for a roof or driveways, whatever it may be, that's where you should be spending that money. One of the things that we're seeing a lot, and we've talked about this a lot, is insurance going up.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to slow down a little bit, but we are seeing associations getting dropped and going into high risk policies. So we're seeing a lot of added assessments and people doing added assessments for their insurance premiums because they can be very high. But then they're taking that money and spending it on flowers or landscape. And you want to make sure that the money you earmark for a project or for funding stays and does what it's supposed to be spent for.
And one of the most important aspects is in your community is vendors. The invoices they submit and making sure that you're paying them promptly. If you delay payments to vendors, they're not going to want to work on your community. If they did the work, you don't have questions about if something matched up with the scope or if something was wrong. Of course, if there's an issue like that, pause, question it, get the answers. But if normal course of business, you should make sure that we're approving invoices promptly, regularly, and making sure that vendors get paid on time. We process invoices twice a month for that particular reason, so vendors aren't waiting a long time to get payment. But if boards are holding up a decision on approving one because they're having a discussion about we should have done X, Y, and Z instead of this option, well, that's not the vendor's fault. The vendor did what you asked, make sure they're paid, and then you can have that discussion afterwards.
Yeah, another time we see where board members hold back payment to vendors is for bill backs. You know, when it's a homeowner problem or, the association is going to bill back a homeowner for whatever it may be. They're penalizing the vendor. They're holding that money because they're trying to decide how to pay, who's going to pay for that. Well, that's not the vendor's problem. That's the board's problem. You pay them and then you figure it out.
So stepping into collections a little, we talked about this already. This is your question exactly.
Yeah.
Here's the typical policy of there's several late letters that go. There's typically a sliding scale of late fees that are assessed. They generally increase for most governing documents based on the length of time. And then it goes to an attorney. An attorney sends a demands letter. They have 30 days to respond to that demands letter. If they don't respond, the attorney sends a lien notice. They have 10 days to respond to that lien notice. If they don't, a lien is placed. And then at that point, the attorney is doing what's called a preliminary asset report. Or some sort of asset report to find where there's an avenue that they can actually collect funds from that co-owner. So they're looking at if their employee and their wages can be garnished, if there's assets that can be seized, if foreclosure is the option, if there's a bank account that you can garnish from. The attorney's pulling all that information, putting it together, and then giving a recommendation to the board to how to proceed to collect that money. So that's where it's super critical that the board read that, review that, and then take action on it. Don't just let it sit there and be like, yeah, they'll pay eventually. That's not a good business practice.
Right. I mean, and you want to be neutral and follow what your governing documents say about collections. You know, I know it's hard. It's hard, especially if it's your neighbor, you know, it's someone's personal circumstance. But again, you have a fiduciary responsibility to the entire community. You cannot put others at financial risk because you feel bad for someone's personal situation. We've all been there. Every single one of us have. And that's why you should, again, rely on your legal team to do that collection. That's payment plans, something I see all the time. Board members don't want to turn people over. They want the manager to review payment plans. We're not going to do that. That's not a legal form of the collection process. If you want a structured payment plan, it needs to go through your attorney. It's just as simple as that. There's a lot of risk, there's a liability, and then again, we could be accused of being biased towards one person or another because we're trying to put someone on a payment plan and then somebody else goes to the agent.
And there's, once it becomes to that point, there's laws that impact fair debt collection practices and different things that the attorneys have to adhere to. So we shouldn't be making payment plans or making payment arrangements with someone that could potentially violate that. And you may not know that as a board member. But you want to have it go through the attorney. They have legal documentation drawn up saying this is the payment plan we're on, here's the ramifications if you default on it, and outline that whole process so it is consistent. It's everyone follows that same process.
Yeah, and we have a little chart down here, which is a generalization of what the timeline looks like. And our system, the portal, Danica, it generates these notices automatically until it gets to a point where it goes to the final notice, and then that's when we as managers go to the board at a board meeting and have the discussion, and the board makes the decision whether or not to turn the account over to legal. And it's important to document that.
And the answer should always be yes.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little to annual meeting. The annual meeting is just a board meeting on steroids. It should run the same way. It should follow the same process. There should be an agenda. The meeting minutes should flow the same. It realistically should be run in the same manner as the board meeting, especially if you're conducting open sessions at a board meeting. That's essentially what an annual meeting is as well. There's going to be restrictions in your governing documents. If not, the Condo Act supersedes it about how you have to send out notice to the community. The typical rule of thumb is 10 to 60 days before the meeting. I think the Condo Act says like more than 10, less than 30 is the verbiage that's in there, I believe, right now. But it's important to get it out to them so that they can plan to attend the annual meeting, but don't send it 6 months in advance and say, hey, there's a meeting, because no one will know. They'll forget about it by then. But also don't say, hey, we're having a meeting tomorrow. Please show up. That won't work either.
And you want to have it at a time, a location that is convenient for everybody. Often we see board members are like, oh, can we do it at your office at 8:15 on a random Tuesday morning so nobody comes? I mean, and that's the truth.
Yeah. We just had one a couple weeks ago like that, actually.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to have these meetings. Again, you want to put yourself out there. You want to show your community what you're doing, the progress you're making, and that's their time. That's their meeting. It's an annual meeting is the meeting of the homeowners and the members. It's not a board meeting. So this is their opportunity when they come and they elect you to represent them. It's the only time that it's a democracy for them.
Who should run the annual meeting? Or president or the manager?
So, it varies.
I can give you different answers on this one.
Yeah, Lee and I see this differently. I always prefer to run annual meetings myself. And I always insist on homeowner participation. I'm asking for motions from the floor. I don't let the board run it because, again, it's a meeting of the homeowners. The homeowners should be participants. There are many boards that want to run it themselves. I've seen where the board president, I went to one where the board president stood on the stage like she was a dictator. Yeah. Of the world. And nobody got to say anything. Nobody got to do anything. I mean, it wasn't productive. People left very disgruntled, angry. So make it open and flow. I try to walk around the room and, talk to people and engage with people. People aren't coming to meetings to tell you how great you are. They're usually coming to tell you how terrible you are. So we want to live in that atmosphere. So sometimes as a manager, we can diffuse that really well because that's what we do for a living. And then that's your time as a board member to actually sit and absorb to hear what they're saying.
Well, and it's really important to you as a board member know the demographic of your community better than we're going to. So knowing the venue where the meeting should take place, knowing when that meeting should take place, knowing the topics that may or may not come up in the meeting and kind of being prepared for that in advance is critical. But it's important to have, like Kathleen said, we can be the bad guy, we can be the good guy as your management company, and you can be that bridge, that liaison between the board and the homeowners if need be. But realistically, the meeting should be chaired by a member of the board. we can't, like as a managing agent, we can't call the meeting to order. That's not within our authority. The board has to call that meeting to order. A lot of times, like Kathleen said, we end up running the meeting just to keep things flowing, to keep everything going well, but the board should actively participate in it as well.
The collaboration with everyone.
Exactly. And it goes back to the same thing of controlling the room, sticking to the agenda, maintaining decorum, keeping order, following parliamentary procedure, Robert Rule of Order, recording minutes. All those things.
Once again, you want to go 6
All
times
those same
straight
things
though.
that apply to board meetings apply to annuals. Like I said earlier, an annual is just a board meeting on steroids. It's the same concept, same processes. It's just a bigger, more elaborate production.
And you know, one of the things too is don't feel like you need to be a punching bag. I see this all the time, and I'm sure all the managers, you know, people come angry and very disgruntled, and you don't have to take that as a board member. I mean, we want to make sure people conduct themselves accordingly and behave properly. So, you know, if somebody is getting out of hand, that's usually when your manager is going to step in and then say, you know, you can't behave yourself, we're going to have to ask you to leave. And that's, you know, that's important to know. And it does happen. It does. And board members oftentimes think that because of the position that they're in, they are a verbal punching bag to their community, and you are not.
So just make sure you bring something that you can just throw if callers are doing that. Squirt gun, that's a good idea. Nerf gun, maybe.
You know, I always tell people, I will address you in the same manner you address me. I'm always going to be professional. I expect the same, you know, in return. And if you're not going to conduct your business with me professionally, I'm not going to conduct my business with you at all. And I think that's okay to say.
Well, and it's important to, Kathleen mentioned a few times, and we've seen so many things over the years between all of our managers, all of our executive team. We have hundreds of years combined of experience managing associations. We've all seen different things. We all are trained to deal with difficult situations. We've seen it all. Where we can help diffuse things, we can help redirect things. I've been at meetings where I've told the team that's with me to leave because it's getting hostile. And there's been meetings where the police have showed up. We've seen everything and anything, and
I had to
handled it.
I had to sit in once.
Yeah.
Or stage to sit in.
So we've seen all these different situations that you as board members may have not seen, or may have not even thought in the realm of possibility at a professional annual meeting. But we've seen it, believe it or not. So let us be there to help guide you and help deal with those situations and be that liaison.
And oftentimes, and I'm going to bring this full circle, you know, people are usually disgruntled and angry because they feel there's no transparency or they feel they were targeted. And that all goes back to uniformly enforcing things, being consistent, being transparent. Because when you're all of those things, there's no reason for people to get angry. I'm not saying people don't get angry. There's always that one person who gets a violation for dog poop and then lose their mind, right? But if you have a group of people that are coming in that all got violation letters to repaint and tear off their deck and they have 7 days, they're going to be mad, right? Because those are unrealistic. So understand that their actions are a direct result of your actions. So keep that in mind when you're doing these things.
And when you have that openness and that transparency, it's great to see you have that one disgruntled homeowner that's going to be griping about something, but then you have 10 other homeowners that are in the audience that are like, no, you're wrong, or that's not how this happened, because they paid attention to newsletters, they've attended meetings, they've kept in the loop with that communication. So you don't even have to deal with it at that point. All the other homeowners are shutting them down and saying, no, you're crazy. That's not what happened. That's the best case scenario.
And keep yourself composed. You know, you want to, again, conduct yourself professionally. You're the professional representation of your association.
So I'll blow through this real quick. It's same as board meetings. So you're gonna follow parliamentary procedures, Robert's Rule of Order. You're gonna call it to order. You're gonna verify there's quorum. You're gonna approve the annual minutes. So those, like Kathleen said, this is a meeting of the homeowners. So the homeowner should be approving those minutes at the annual meeting. They should be distributed in advance so the homeowners can read them. So they're not voting on something with 2 seconds to read it. The different officers of the association should give reports. Typically the president, treasurer, if there's committees within your association, which there should be. In every association, you should at least have a couple committees. They should be giving reports. Your association manager should be giving a report, and you should be conducting the election. That should be all that's happening in an open forum for homeowners, but that should be all that's happening at an annual meeting. You shouldn't be going off on tangents and having discussions about things. You should be sticking to this agenda.
Yeah, and we find a lot of times we don't have quorum, so people think, oh my gosh, this is so great, we don't have quorum, we can spend the next hour just talking about everything. We don't. 15 minutes, everybody can be out of there. You can do all of these things in 15 minutes. People's time is valuable. Again, you don't want to continue to keep burning yourselves out.
And this is an example of what a notice looks like. Again, it's important. We've talked a lot today about just documenting everything, having consistency, having templates, having processes for everything. This is what an annual meeting notice looks like typically. And you're just filling in the blanks. Same as we talked about with the secretary taking minutes. You're just filling in the blanks every year, and you're being consistent using that process. So it's not something labor intensive for you as a board member.
We're going to send this to you, the PowerPoint, after this as well. So that'll be in follow-up. So that example will be for reference.
Contracts.
Switching gears to contracts.
Contracts are always fun. I mean, that is what drives business is contracts. It's important to have a thorough, efficient contract. We want to work with vendors that can put a good contract together that has a scope of work, a decent scope of work. We want to make sure that scope of work is what we want them to do, not what we think they should do. Again, this is important. Contracts, read them and enforce them as they're written, not what you think. I hear all the time board members will say, well, I thought they were going to do such and such. And I will have a manager that says, well, it says right here they were doing the opposite of that. And then it becomes very contentious. And then all of a sudden the manager is put in this position where, well, why didn't you tell me this? But the board signed the contract. And that's why board members should all read the contracts, not just one person. Because if you're not all on the same page and you can't come to an agreement of what the scope of work is, then you shouldn't be signing a contract. One person should not be doing that. You should all be collectively doing it together.
And it's critical that, again, going back to having a process at the very beginning before you're entering or even considering entering into a contract or something, the board should have an idea, have a discussion of what they want that project to look like, what they think the scope should be. They should be giving that to the manager and then saying, hey, here's what we're thinking. The manager can give their advice. We can call on different vendors to give more detailed scopes if we need to. And then you should be verifying that scope before it's even sent out to bid. Yeah. That way you know vendors are bidding exactly what you want. Whether they actually bid what you tell them to bid, that's a whole other thing. But at least you have that template from the start, and you know you're asking for what you actually want. So it doesn't come to that point where you're like, oh, I thought they were going to scrape the paint before they repainted it. Well, the contract didn't state that. It just said they were going to paint it. So they painted over the chipping paint. So it's important to have those expectations and have those discussions before the contract is even signed.
And when we create our RFPs, you should be part of that process. I mean, we have standard RFPs that we use for landscape, snow removal, wood repair, painting, different kinds of scopes. You should look at those. Make sure you're on the same page, because if you're not on the same page and we're sending out RFPs with something that you may or may not want, you're going to get a contract with the scope of work of something you don't want. So talk to your manager. Ask to see the RFP. Put it together in a meeting. That's what meetings are for. Work on things like that.
And some of the main things that should be in a contract, obviously the scope, start and end dates, payment terms, insurance requirements for the vendor, licensing if it's something that they are required to have a license for, termination clauses, just making sure that you don't have anything that is unanswered is the biggest thing.
Contact information. I recently was given a landscape contract that a board member went and found a landscaper. It had no name, no phone number, no contact information. It said mowing and how much it was going to be. And that is a contract that they signed. It didn't even have the name of the vendor on it. That's where the problem comes in. And the motivation was they want to find somebody cheap. Well, they were very cheap, but what if they cut someone's arm off? It guaranteed they didn't have insurance. And guess what? They didn't. Not one bit of insurance. So it's important that you rely on us to look at these contracts. And when we push back, it's not because we don't want to use your vendor. We want to protect all of you. That's our job. We have that fiduciary responsibility. Make sure that you're not putting your entire association at risk by signing a bad contract.
And if it's a contract for a large project, something complex, a multi-year roofing project, something that has great risk or great liability, it's something your attorney should be reviewing, especially if it's a very expensive contract where it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. That should be something run by your legal counsel to make sure that if something happens, you have the proper outs, you have the proper insurance coverage, and the association is ultimately protected.
Yeah, and include maps. You know, where they're supposed to be mowing, what roof they're supposed to be replacing. Maps and visual representations of what you want are very important too.
Next, going into architectural modifications. So this follows our same theme that we've had all night here. Stay consistent, document things, and have a process. Architectural requests are the same thing. You should be following. It's outlined in your governing documents what that process should look like. It's typically the same across most associations. Homeowners are submitting the request to us as the management company. We're kind of scrubbing it and vetting it to make sure all the things that are required to be there are there, making sure they have maps, color samples, details of what they're doing, making sure that packet is complete, and then we're sending it to the board to review. The board then has a responsibility to review that timely. There's certain things that homeowners can request to modify, and if the board doesn't review it within certain timelines, it's automatically approved. So the board has to be conscious to follow processes and to be timely with board actions.
And I'm sure you're starting to see a theme, right? Uniform enforcement and selective enforcement, and that goes the same for architectural control. Sometimes we see people that say, "I don't like Jimmy, and I don't want him to have a fence," and Jimmy can have a fence just because you don't like him. You have to. So again, you have to be consistent with everything that you're doing. Transparency.
And it's really important that no case-by-case exceptions. It's very important to not only not make exceptions to approve something, but don't deny something just because
You don't like it.
you don't like it. You don't feel that it's right. It's something, if it's not explicitly outlined in your governing documents saying you can't have X, Y, and Z or you can't do this, be very cautious when you deny something because it potentially puts you at risk for denying them for undue reason or for discrimination or whatever the case may be. It's something that you don't want to put yourself in a liable position for. Like we said earlier, you need to. If it's something that you want to deny, you don't think it goes with the aesthetics of your community at all, but it's not something that is in a policy in your governing documents. There's nothing saying one way or the other, but you just disagree that it should be in your community, run it by your attorney, see what they say. Then you at least have that documentation from the attorney if something happens in the future saying, hey, why was this denied and this one was approved, or vice versa.
And the same goes for the opposite, granting variances. Make sure you have the authority to grant a variance. We see that happen all the time too. And really, a lot of associations don't give you governing documents, don't give the board authority to grant a variance. So it's important on both sides of that to understand your role and what you can and can't do.
And the approvals, when you're approving something as a board or as an association, You're not approving city ordinances. You're not approving codes. You're not ensuring that they meet codes with whatever they're installing. That's not really in your scope or your responsibility as a board member. You're just approving it as it relates to the community. Whether it's aesthetically, whether it appears to the governing documents, the onus is on that homeowner or that co-owner to hire a licensed professional to make sure they're going from visit date, and to make sure that they're following all of their due process on their side.
Right. And keep in mind, you can't police when somebody fails to comply with local ordinances. You can't do that. So you don't have the authority to deny something based on that if it complies with the governing documents.
Rule enforcement, our favorite, violations. So again, what's the pattern here? Fair, consistent, uniform. Make sure that you are only enforcing rules that are in your governing documents. Don't make up things. Don't arbitrarily say, I don't like that garbage can there. It can't be there. Is it in your governing documents? Is it in a policy? Is it in a rule? If you get drugged to court, can you defend it? If you can't answer yes to all of those questions, don't send that violation. It's not worth it.
Yeah, and that's always the verbiage that we use. Can you defend your actions in front of a judge? Can you stand in front of a judge and say why this person got this violation when it's outside the scope of what your authority is in the governing documents? And like Lee said, if you can't say yes, then you're not subject to the violation.
And even if it's ambiguous, we talked about earlier, governing documents have gray areas. They have ambiguity. If you're interpreting something one way, but someone is interpreting it a different way, don't send that violation. It's not worth it. If there's, one I see all the time is governing documents say, trash or productive things must be stored somewhere that is reasonably inconspicuous. What's reasonably inconspicuous? One board member might say, I don't want to see a trash can ever. One board member may say, as long as it's on the side of the house, kind of tucked out of view from the front, that's fine. You don't want to get into that. If you want to enforce that, the correct path to go is to create a policy, create a rule and regulation that addresses that, and then you can enforce it.
Right, and a good rule is created to solve a problem, and it has to be uniformly enforced. So if you have a rule that can't meet those criteria, then it's not a rule you should be enforcing or creating, for that matter. I mean, we have to start somewhere with these, and realistic time frame to resolve and remedy. We see a lot of times people will say, "Oh, you have to replace all of them in your house, and you have 10 days." Well, that's unrealistic. We can't get work done in 10 days. And we have some associations that will sit on projects for 2 years and then want a homeowner to get something done in 10 days. But in perspective, you want to look at their financial constraints, their timeline, what their personal situation is. You have to be realistic in enforcing these things.
And escalate them as needed. Once you follow, again, your governing documents, we're going to outline usually a first violation, second violation, third violation, and then escalate it as your governing documents dictate. Don't just keep finding someone over and over. If they haven't complied by the fourth notice, they're not going to. Don't just keep finding them. Turn it over to the association to take legal action against it. Fines aren't meant to be punitive, surprisingly, and a lot of Michigan judges will just throw the fines out if it gets to that point, because it's not meant to be punitive. It's supposed to encourage enforcement. And if you're just fining to fine, judges don't take kindly to that.
Right. If you're fining for 3 years, Jessica and I have this situation going on right now where they want somebody for, it's been going on 5 years to daily fine somebody. We have told them they need to turn them over for legal counsel or drop it. What people understand is when you're doing rule enforcement, this is the biggest misconception board members have how much authority they have. It's really not much you can do. You can't go into someone's personal property. It's different when you have condos and townhomes and things. Common areas, you can remove things, bird feeders, whatever it may be. But you're not going into people's driveways towing cars. You're not doing a lot of different things. So you have to understand what your authority is and what the realistic remedy is in the big picture. And is it worth it? This particular is a fence situation. The homeowner is moving. Now they want to turn it over to legal. That's unrealistic. What a waste of association money. It's going to get dragged out in court. And legal tell you, he and I are starting to find these breach of contract lawsuits, they're not fighting for associations anymore. They're inclined to rule on the side of the co-owners all the time. And some of them are very black and white, where we're like, oh, this is a slam dunk. We lose. I have an association right now, they're about $100,000 in legal fees. And now they're going after the homeowner flooded an entire building, the association has to pay them $50,000. $50,000. That is our settlement. And we thought this was black and white. So again, it all starts from the very beginning. Does it make sense to send this violation?
And just having the support and the backup for it within your governing documents. Make that decision with rationale behind it. Make it something that you can defend in court. Make it something that you would be okay with being publicized, that, hey, this board member made this decision. Are you okay with that going on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever? On what? Are you okay with that? If so, great, then make that decision. But you have to have that business acumen and that thought process behind it with every decision that you make as a board member.
Yeah, you need to take the emotion out of it. And it's difficult because these are our neighbors, our friends. But emotion cannot be part of any decision making. So you should be following your written governing documents.
So kind of summarizing what we've talked about here on the last few slides is just understand your documents, understand your limits, what you can and can't do, what authority your governing documents grant you as board members, what authority you have under state statutes, federal statutes as board members, what you can and can't do within your community. Same goes with co-owners. We have the same conversation with them, and they call and say, hey, I got a violation for installing a fence. Well, you have to adhere to the processes in place to install that fence. You as board members have the same process that you have to do with every decision you make. So it's important just to be consistent, have that support, know what you can and can't do. If you don't, ask. Get that professional advice. Ask your management team. Ask your legal counsel. Get that guidance if you're unsure on something. Make sure that you're collaborating as a board member. So many times we see some board members aren't actively participating within the board. So one or two board members end up kind of running the show, and the other ones are there in spirit, and they're technically board members, but they don't participate, they don't make decisions, they don't respond to emails. Then you as the remaining board members need to have that discussion with them, have them step off the board if they're not going to participate, nominate someone else to jump on. There's provisions in your governing documents about removing board members or appointing board members. So again, it goes back to knowing those documents and what you can and can't do, because you really should have a whole collaborative board. You shouldn't have one person that's trying to make decisions, that's trying to do what's best for the community, because they will get burned out. They'll get tired of it. They won't want to do that. It's important to have, there's a board of directors in place to make decisions on behalf of the community, to have that diversity amongst those board members, different opinions, different ideas, to make decisions for the best of the community. So it's important to have different perspectives and not just have one or two that kind of steer the ship.
Yeah, and when you just have a few people that try to control and dictate, that's when you start to have a lot of disgruntled homeowners and you cause contention, and it just causes problems. Again, you're a collaborative group. Work as a collaborative group. Work with your management team, your legal counsel, your, accountant. Everything doesn't fall on you as a board member. That's why you hire a team of professionals. And
keep, like we've said all along, keep everything transparent, keep it documented. Natalie served her term, put it in minutes. Make sure you're documenting everything. Make sure you're being open and transparent with your community about everything that happens within your community. They're all vested stakeholders in it. Make sure that they have a voice. Make sure that they're heard, and that you're making decisions in their best interest. So with that, we will open it up to questions.
Questions?
I have a question on the bylaws. Our association has both condo bylaws and association bylaws. Is there a hierarchy to that?
Corporate bylaws and bylaws.
And then bylaws and association bylaws, I think title says.
What association are you?
Cliff Landing.
I don't know those ones off the top of my head. Yeah, so there is hierarchy because there's even bylaws, there's corporate bylaws, there's association bylaws, so there is a hierarchy in those. Usually corporate ones supersede
The
association.
shadow one is probably corporate.
Yeah, okay. So that would probably be the corporate one. And those bylaws typically talk about just administration processes. So it talks about how meetings operate, how elections are held, and your condo bylaws talk about the rules, the processes, all of that type of stuff.
Any questions? Discussion? Any online? Oh, I have a question. Okay, you had mentioned the sample agenda and the minute template. Is that on the association on our website? And
We can distribute that out through the with the presentation. You can get that for you. I can get that information and send it to you directly. We don't have it online. It's just something we use internally and distribute it for
oh,
you.
okay.
But do you get management reports from?
Yes, we get a management report, but we right now our president does the agenda.
Okay.
And we have a secretary, and it'd be helpful for her to have a template to use because she's sometimes struggling for what to put down, and so I think it would just be helpful for her to have something that's useful an example to make her job a lot easier.
We can definitely get that. I'll get your information after the meeting and I can take that over to you.
And it's important for those to have a set agenda, meeting template, and you just use those each time.
Right,
So it doesn't matter if that secretary can't come to a meeting, if there's a new secretary elected, that same process flows, and there's no disruption to the association's business.
And the agenda that we have keeps the flow of the meeting really well and just keeps that intact. So it's good to have a standardized agenda as well. Any online questions?
I'm gonna. Oh, you got one. Good.
Got a live one. Go ahead, Greg.
How do you feel about televising your meetings so
We were joking.
I
We said you make it on TV.
Cheers.
that it's like a YouTube channel or in some other way, so that people who are disabled cannot attend? It opens it up to the entire community. We can't fit the entire community into a room.
Greg, you have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I have to unmute myself. I thought I did.
I think yes.
Yeah, it's off. I don't know.
There you go. Try again, Greg. Sorry, I had you muted.
Oh, okay. So what do you think about a YouTube channel, or if you have some other way of having the entire community have access to the board meeting? Because there's 360 units here. Couldn't possibly get everybody into the room.
Yeah, great question. And that's where it's important to have your governing documents updated to allow for virtual attendance or hybrid meetings where you can have some in person and some virtually. But if your governing documents don't allow for that, then sure, record the meeting, distribute it on either the portal or some other channel that works for your association, and have those transcripts or recordings available to the community. That's a great form of transparency and communication. If everyone can attend the meetings, then that's a good idea.
Yeah.
No, I was talking about the whole meeting being recorded. It does say that you can attend a meeting virtually as a board member.
And like we said, there's a couple of different options to do that. Just keep in mind when you're recording meetings, when you have meetings that you're publishing, those are your formal, record of your meeting. So you want to be very conscious of how you conduct business, because you want to conduct it much differently when you're on camera. And those are published and memorialized on YouTube.
And making sure that you are not publishing any executive sessions or anything that's confidential, or where you're discussing specific homeowners, making sure that you're referring to things like account numbers or something where no one else can identify who you're talking about. So just making it's a whole nother level of scrutiny under it when you're recording it. So you want to make sure that you're really dotting your I's and crossing your T's. But yeah, it's doable.
I
You know, a lot
noticed
of
I noticed you were recording the meeting with, or doing your notes with Gemini, so that's what made me think of it.
we do. We
Yeah,
can do that, but those are internal. So those are documents that we keep internally that we use to transcribe our minutes in our notes. Those are official records and published for homeowners.
Okay.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Thanks, Greg.
Houses.
So, Community Association Manager Day is actually coming up here pretty soon, and I just wanted to give a hand to our manager. Everybody showed up here. They have your best interest at heart always, and sometimes this job is a little bit thankless. You know, you're helping people that are in need. Sometimes they're upset. They're dealing with a lot of different things. So I think it's important for all of you to know how much we appreciate you and thank you for everything that you do and being here also as a resource. And making these seminars are fantastic. You guys did a great job, and I learned so much. I know everybody did too. So, a couple things we have coming up. I talked about those. The next seminar that's going to be on budgets. There's a seminar after that on reserve studies. Those are here every second Wednesday, so of the month. So we're going to have those, and they're always recorded online as well. And then we have our expo that's coming up. That's going to be in October at the same place as last year in Livonia. So brunch mimosas, and we're going to have another panel discussion or something similar to this, where we're going to bring in the education piece too. So we're excited to see you for that. And then I have one last thing. We have a new KS Perks program that we launched. So some great discounts for you for local restaurants and some of the vendors that we work with. And Brad right here, we are going to be creating, I think, a seminar for the two of you have come up with an idea. And that's what we want. We want the feedback. So after this, send us an email, reach out, contact us, let us know what you find is a gap that we can help with. And if one of those things is finding out what somebody has sold a condo or a home, and you want to know when that transition happens, what that process is, we're going to build something out for that with our loan officer and our mortgage department just for you. So love the feedback. Thank you for being here always too. Everybody who came in person and online, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, everyone.